welcome to the next generation of warfare, psychological warfare. In modern conflict, the mind is a potent weapon. Discover General Michael T. Flynn's groundbreaking guide, A Citizen's Guide to Fifth Generation Warfare. Unlock tactics, strategies, and the mindset to navigate this cognitive battlefield that we all find ourselves in. Equip yourself against manipulation and emerge unscathed. Unleash your potential. Order now.
After the Second World War, Britain and the US established a secret network of stay-behind armies in over 15 European countries, including neutral Switzerland and Austria. They were managed by the local secret services in close cooperation with the CIA and MI6. In each country, the network had its own name: Gladio in Italy, SDRA-8 in Belgium, Überall Agenten in Germany.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's episode of the Daily 302. I'm your host, Daniel McGirr, coming to you from the great state of Kansas. And it is an honor and a pleasure to welcome back Colonel Watkins to the show. And we have a new guest who is also a subject matter expert in the short video clip that you just seen on Operation Gladio. Brady, also known as War Hamster, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you, sir. It's an absolute pleasure to finally get on here. We've got a lot of mutual friends.
Yes, we do. A lot of mutual friends that are digging into a lot of important things, a lot of important topics. And I kind of like doing these shows with you guys, right? Because this kind of veers from my normal of talking about the border crisis, human trafficking, even though this is obviously tied into this, but a lot of people are not educated enough on this topic, right? So I like to break away. It seems like we've been doing this once a month, Colonel. This is your third show. You're like an alumni now,
Yes.
you know? So it's really good to have you guys on here to talk about this. Brady, I mentioned a little bit off air, and Colonel had to go through this on her initial episode of, I kind of like everybody to get to know who you are as a first timer, because you're not going to be a one time. This isn't a one hit wonder show. So I suspect you're going to be on multiple times, but I want the audience to get to know who you are as a person. So before we kind of jump into our topic of Gladio and more education on that, if you could just kind of let us know a little bit about yourself, your background, your upbringing, your career, and whatever it is you've been doing, and then we'll talk about how you got hooked up with this lady.
Very good. I'll just spend a couple minutes on this, and I appreciate the heads up because I don't normally like talking about myself too much, but I can probably do it for 2 or 3 minutes without blushing. Born in Texas, so it's one thing everybody needs to know about me. I am a true Texan. You can take the Texas out of the boy. You take the boy out of Texas. You cannot take the Texas out of the boy. So I've got that spirit. That's foundational to who I am. I usually describe myself as a reformed Wall Street investment advisor who saw the writing on the wall and got out. I'm also an amateur historian, constitutionalist, original intent. But I'm going to share a story with your listeners that I don't normally tell. How did I get into the type of research we're doing? It'll only take a minute or two, but my parents knew that I was a little bit precocious when it came to history. I was a bit of an avid studier of it. So they bought me the 10-volume encyclopedic history of the world by Will and Ariel Durant. And now it's up to like 12 volumes, but I read that at like age 11. And then I'm going to school and I'm finding out that the history they're teaching me is different than Will and Ariel Durant are telling. And I'm asking the tough questions. And, I probably got sent to detention a few times. I was also an avid sports guy. And if you live on the West Coast, which I did, we'd move out to Oregon and California at a young age, you recognize that there's something called an East Coast media bias. Yeah, when it comes to like ranking your teams or voting for most valuable player, the West Coast guys always got screwed. And so now you've got this innate distrust of not only academia, but the media. And that sent me on my way. Here's a story I don't tell very often, and I'm going to do this for your show. If you go back to 1992, there was a murder-suicide case in Rancho Santa Fe, California, where a gentleman by the name of Ian Spiros in Spiro. Apparently murdered his wife and 3 kids. And, apparently he's having a tough time playing the shell game with getting one step ahead of his creditors and everything like that. And apparently Rancho Santa Fe is a very affluent part of San Diego. And apparently he killed his wife and kids. And that was the official story after the sheriff investigated everything like that. The only problem is that's not the way it happened. Why do I know? Because Gail Spiro was my mom's tennis partner. I'd had dinner with their family. I knew the wife, I knew the husband, I knew the kids. Ian loved his family. He did not do that. It was outside the realm of possibility. So I started looking into this. I'm in college at the time, 1992, and we don't have the internet. So I'm in the college library going through microfiche, and I'm reading about the CIA. And this guy apparently had contacts, through oil deals in the Middle East, but also the hostage crisis in Lebanon. And he was taken out by, I am 100% convinced that Ian Spiro and his family were taken out by a Middle East hit team. But, this is my mom's tennis partner. I knew these people. So I've been on the quote unquote conspiracy theory train for a long, long time. Fast forward 10 years, I get a job working for the Wall Street banks. And when you're working in the investments, stuff like international investments, and I'm dealing with money going all over the world. When you start to see how they actually, make the bread, you got to look at yourself in the mirror and say, do you like what you see? And I did. In 2009, I said, I can't do this anymore, and work for the next decade as an independent investment advisor. But I did get to peek behind the curtain of the Wizard of Oz. And because of that, I was able to, continue to do a lot of research into the questions about how the world really works. And so I come at it from a financial standpoint, but also from a conspiracy theory standpoint. And that's who I am. I'm just a guy who's trying to get the truth out there.
No, that's good stuff. This may be a whole separate show, Brady, but I'm curious if you have read the book Fruit of the Poisonous Tree. I kind of pop it up on this show every once in a while when we start talking about finances and the IRS and the whole birth certificate system. But that's a very passionate topic for myself, and understanding how we have been turned into slaves for quite some time now. But maybe that's for another day.
It'll be a fun conversation.
For sure.
I think I know the theory, the angle you're coming from, and I think there is some truth to it, and some of it I think has been a little bit of an internet sensation. But the foundation of that theory is spot on.
Yeah, I mean the whole Jekyll Island stuff, I think, is the truth part of it.
Yeah, I've actually, been invited into G. Edward Griffin's home and spoken with him about all these, about the Jekyll Island stuff, and that is a great man. And
oh man, get ready, guys. There's a separate show coming. All right. So let's talk about, Colonel, how you and Brady got hooked up here, and then I want to get into basically a very simple refresher course on Gladio, right? In case there's anybody new here, and then.
Well, I think Brady has the better edge. I'm going to let him tell the story, because there was some behind the scenes that I'm not as well versed in. But go ahead, Brady.
Well, simple version is I met this gal who's now I've been married to now for 2 weeks, and a couple of years ago we'd known each other through an internet thread. Mutual friends put us together, and we finally met 2 years ago. And I don't know, about a year and a half, about 6 months into our relationship before we got married, she says, she's on Truth Social, and she keeps sending me these links from this crazy person named Colonel Towner-Watkins. And because this gal talks about the same stuff you talk about. And, my wife it's weird saying my wife.
I know.
It's been my fiance for so long. But so long story short, I start following Colonel Towner on Truth. We start exchanging messages back and forth. And within a matter of a few weeks, we knew that we were kindred souls. And we get on the phone, and first conversation only lasted, 3 hours?
Something like that.
Yeah. So, it was just one of the really, really good connections of two minds we came to the same conclusions from different directions. And so when we start talking, I mean, we should have recorded that conversation. It would have been an amazing show.
But also, he's being way too modest. So War Hamster, as soon as we had that conversation, starts making phone calls because obviously he's in the space. I did prior to meeting Brady, I had done a couple of podcasts with Brian Cates. Brian Cates is a very dear friend of mine and he lives near me. And when he moved here, him and I would do a few podcasts together because I have some area of expertise and not anything to do with Gladio because at the time I didn't even know anything about Gladio. Or I was just getting into the research part of it. And so War Hamster starts making phone calls. He starts calling Ron Partain. He calls Alpha. And so before I knew it, I'm like on Ron's show. Brady and I are making podcasts. And then Alpha reaches out. And, that's almost a year ago now that we started the Operation Gladio series on his show every Wednesday night at 9:30. And so my whole life changed after that conversation with Brady.
Yeah, I remember that one part of the conversations. The Colonel had done some pretty good digging. She discovered Gladio. She's like a dog with a bone, in case you haven't noticed. And she has gone deeper into this stuff than I ever did. But when I first mentioned Operation Golden Lily and gave her just the oversight of that, next time I talked to her 2 weeks later, she's teaching me. And I've been doing this research for 25, 30 years.
Okay, so let me tell that he's not even telling you the real story. So I did very early on, we did an intro because he wanted to be like my guinea pig. And he goes, well, let me be the person you're explaining it to. Let's do a Gladio 101. And it's one of the very first Rumble shows on my Rumble channel. I had to make the Rumble channel basically to do the show. And so we do the show, and at the end of the show, after we had signed off and we're still on StreamYard, he says something, and I'm like, he says, I have some homework for you. I said, okay, I'll have a homework for you. So I'm going to give you a subject to look into, and you give me a subject to look into. Well, he gave me Golden Lily. And so I gave him one. He never did do his, by the way. I did Golden Lily, and I did like a series of 2 different shows. I read the book. I have like 3 books on it. Because the word you were looking for, Brady, is persistent. I am not a dog with a bone. You never call a woman a dog.
My apologies.
No, that's great stuff. And I mean, you're gonna have to explain Golden Lily because I don't think we talked about that either, Colonel. But I mean, eventually. But
it is part of Operation Gladio.
Well, I mean, we've talked about this, Colonel. Like everything is part of it at this point, right? I mean, it's the first. I think it was the second show that we did. It's probably last month. I think we've been doing once a month now. I think. But I mean, I'm even seeing it with people like we've talked about on X, right? Where we think that there are people on our side, these big name podcasters, these big name guys that say they come from the CIA, like Mike Benz and Sean Ryan, and these guys are all part of the whole problem. I mean, it's unbelievable how far this thing trickles down, and nobody can put their finger on what's going on here. That's why I think that this needs to be such a much bigger topic of discussion, and much bigger, like more podcasters need to be talking about this than just a handful, right?
So they don't, because of the implications to them. It's kind of almost like the taboo. You can't talk about Israel in any true sense, like saying something like they were the cutout on the Iran Contra, right? So we're going to send missiles to Iran, but we can't do it overtly in the 80s because we're funding the Iraq side of the war, but we want something from Iran and they want missiles. So who do we use? We use Israel. So Israel, in many ways, we did the same thing with Angola. We sent munitions from Israel to South Africa because we couldn't do it directly with South Africa because they're apartheid, into Angola. And that was all during the Reagan administration. And when you start talking about that, as soon as those words come out of your mouth, you're accused of being an anti-Semite. It has nothing to do with that. I don't give a crap one way or the other about what the religion is or anything else. That everything I just said is a fact. It's already been documented, declassified, blah, blah, blah. And Operation Gladio is very much the same way. If you start talking about this, they are no longer the gatekeeper. So They will tell you pieces of this. They don't want you to know the entire conspiracy, because once you see the entire conspiracy, they can never do it again because you see the pattern. The attempted assassination in Slovakia, the unrest that's going on in Georgia, the recent Bangladesh coup, all of it's Gladio. And once you know it, you can never not see it.
Slovenia, Romania. I mean, Congo. It's still going on today. This is not a history lesson. This is an understanding of how the United States foreign policy has been enacted pretty much every day since World War II.
Correct.
Yeah. And this is the thing that I want to hear you guys' opinion on, right? Is like, these are the types of things that I don't think that the whole MAGA movement, the conservative movement, really can grasp right now. Like, the things that we are still up against, even though President Trump is back in the White House, we have the House, we have the Senate, we know that you still have the deep state that still is maintaining some sort of control, right? So people were wondering, why isn't all this stuff just ending right now? Well, it's a lot bigger than people think.
Well,
yeah, let me address that real quick. Dan, you say something interesting. You said we have the House, we have the Senate. Who is we? The Republican Party? Is that what we are about? Is the Republicans' victory? One of the biggest issues we face is this fake construct of right versus left, and that's just a distraction to keep us from looking up and seeing who's pulling the puppet strings. Mm-hmm. And that statement right there is really at the crux of why I do this research, because I want to know who is deciding which countries are going to topple, who's going to be regime changed, who is making these decisions. And that's what I wanted to find out, is who are the people sitting at the big boy table. And because Republicans winning is one thing, but having people that actually understand the original intent of the Constitution, which is self-determination and individual liberty, the things that we believe in at the core of our heart, if you're a true American, who are the people fighting against that? Who are the people trying to take that away from us? That's the path that I was on.
That's an excellent way to put it. I mean, that was a really good correction for me, and because I believe the same way. I don't think just because there's an R in front of somebody's name that there's people on our side. Obviously, they're not. I mean, obviously, people in our circles don't believe that either. But we tend to believe that, look, and I believe in divine appointments. I think you guys had a divine appointment in meeting, you and the Colonel. And Brady, for what it's worth, I've been in this affiliate chat with you for probably a year now.
About that.
There's not much that connections I've made there besides us having an affiliation with General Flynn. But here we are, the next step. I believe this is probably a divine appointment for me. And I think that if you believe in those kind of things, then there's a divine reason why God has allowed President Trump to get in, because he's an outsider. Is going to have the influence. Is Kash Patel, is Dan Bongino, these people that we think are on our side, and we believe that they're on our side, are they the ones that are going to be able to make an impact in stopping this, slowing it down, right? And I always tell people that since inauguration day, we don't have 4 years, we have 2. You have 2 years, because you don't know what corruption is going to happen in the midterms. So we have 2 years to get everything we possibly can accomplish done in that time.
Yeah, it's interesting about that, the 2 years, and I think you're probably right. You got the immediate gratification crowd on X that are really furious at Pam Bondi's JFK file rollout. I mean, that's appropriate, because that was really amateurish the way they rolled it out the first time, thinking that those binders were going to do anything. But my litmus test for Pam Bondi is she said she's going after the 2020 election. She's always been an election integrity person. If she does not accomplish that, going after what happened in the 2020 election, then she will have failed. To me, that's the litmus test. And if that gets addressed, then the midterms in 2026 change quite a bit. So to me, that's what my eyes on Pam Bondi have left less to do with the JFK files and more to do, are you prosecuting 2020 and Spygate, Russiagate, that kind of stuff. And she hasn't talked about it, but COVID too.
Let me interject here, because I didn't see that binder thing as a fail on Pam Bondi's part. My opinion in watching that is there is an entire group of what is referred to as alternative media, which is all of us. And we have collectively always said that we want this stuff like put out on an internet site. We don't want people to be, some in crowd of whatever, and the selected people, the gatekeepers and all that other stuff. So I viewed every single person that showed up for that event fitting in that other category, because had anybody with integrity been asked to go do that and get some ahead of time release, should have said no. Put the stuff out on the internet. We all get it, or none of us gets it. And all that did was highlight each and every one of those people as not one of us.
Well, they're not, because they've been in this upper, and JJ Carroll and I talk about this all the time. It's like there's this upper echelon of the podcasters or the alternative media people, like the Tucker Carlsons, the Dan Bonginos, the DC Dranos. You got this whole group of the Laura Loomers, right? You gave millions of people, but the rest of us, I can't seem to break 1,000 people on X to save my life, and and every week they're taking people away from me for some reason. I'll get to 962, and then a week later I'm back to 951, and it's this like constant cycle, right? And I think that's due to, because we are talking about these topics, we're talking about things that are really truthful. We're not just trying to make names for ourselves. Let's just say we can give two shits about what happens to us when we talk about this stuff, right? So it is what it is.
Right.
Yeah, and it's funny, some of the big audiences, to the Colonel and Daniel's point, they always stop just one step short of asking the big question. And again, as I said just a little bit ago, I always wanted to know who were the puppet masters. And that's what I've been totally focused on. And of course, you follow the money. And what I found by following the money is exactly what the Colonel found by following her Gladio. And we just intersected right in the middle. And that's where it is. So why? The question, of course, is why do they not take the last step and name the names? And I think a lot of the people you named, Bongino, boy, I'm in mourning this week. It's my first week without having an hour a day. I have to watch the Dan Bongino show. I'm 5 hours more productive every week. Thank you, Dan. Hope you do a great job. I think he's one of the best podcasts going, but he never.
I think he does too.
Yeah, but he never takes that last step and asks those final questions.
The thing that stepped me way back from Bongino was the 2020 election. When he came out at 2020, 2021, and he refused to talk about how the election was stolen. That, for him, set me way back. I mean, I still listen to him every once in a while, and, I was happy for him to speak out about all these other things, but if you can't take one of the most evil and corrupt events that have happened, and I understand they've been stealing elections for decades. I'm not naive. I'm not stupid. I've been in this way too long. But 2020 was by far the most in your face, the most corrupt, the most how people can still just turn a blind eye to it. You just can't, especially if you claim to be on the conservative side, right? You can't unsee these things. So that's what kind of set me back for him.
And that's very fair. And to his credit, probably 9 months later, he did change his tune. He goes, look, I've seen enough. And he's been openly calling the 2020 election BS ever since. But your point is valid. He was a little squishy.
He was missing in action when it mattered.
Yeah.
I like the term squishy on the people who weren't ready to say that what was really clear to all. Hey, look, it was election night. We saw that the 5 states, swing states that have never stopped counting in history, all stopped counting at the same time. They stole a dent in my buddy's girlfriend's wall from the beer bottle I threw through the wall when I did that. I go, they're rigging it. I mean, it was right there plain as day.
You should go patch that wall there, Brady.
Yeah. Pretty good shot.
That's just but we all have those moments. That's just like, for me, whatever it was, the weekend of the whole COVID fiasco. And when Fauci came out and said that you needed to wear a mask, and I'm like, I was in the military. I had to go full mop in 120-degree weather in northern Iraq when there was a scare that there was some virus-sized chemical gas released. And I'm like, what? A paper mask? And so my first post after Fauci said that on Truth Social was, what the F? If I could have had a paper mask in Iraq, I wouldn't have lost 50 pounds from sweating my ass off in full mop gear in 120 degrees weather. Who knew a paper mask worked? I carried that damn shit around for 6 months on my hip, and all I had to have was a paper mask. And I looked at my husband and I said, oh my gosh, this is a bioweapons attack. We are being, this is actually a Gladio event right here. We are being attacked domestically by our own government.
Yeah, it was psychological warfare. Exactly what it was. This was it was the technocracy. It's the whole Hegelian dialectic we keep hammering home, but it's thesis, antithesis, synthesis, manufacture a crisis, get everyone scared, and you're able to gain more power incrementally the march through the institutions. And we've got their own writings going back 200 years, more than that, to Hegel, Marx, etc. When they've laid out their game plan. All you have to do is read their own writing and watch them implement it in real time. And we lived through it. It was a Hegelian dialectical attack. And that's what COVID was.
Yeah, and we're dropping all these little nuggets just over the course of 4 or 5 years to let people know that this is all part of the same operation that's been going on for decades, right? But I mean, before we move on from COVID, I was the guy that was day 8 into 15 days to slow the spread, walking around Walmart without a mask and people looking at me like I had the plague. I did not care. I was not going to comply with any of their BS. And that was the very, I wouldn't say it's the very beginning. I mean, I've known about a lot of things over the last few decades, starting, I think a lot of it started with 9/11 with a lot of us.
Yeah, that's a big wake-up call.
Yeah, but once 2020 happened, man, oh, dude, you guys, I got sent home from work it was March 16th of 2020. I'm an estimating manager for a design build firm. They sent me home to work from home. And at that time, both my sons were living at home. I have 2 grown sons. One's youngest is married. The next one's getting married in May. So they moved out. So this is one of their old rooms. So when they lived here, I moved my home office underneath our stairs in this little closet we had, right? And in between doing work, I'm just investigating everything I can get my eyeballs on and just realizing how deep this thing goes. And it's been nonstop since 2020 for me.
Yeah, and when they censored us, you knew the game was up. What really got me is, I was in Southern California, and it really ticked me off. They took down the rims at my local basketball hoop. I like to shoot after working out. They took down the rims, so you couldn't exercise outdoors. They arrested a guy paddleboarding by himself. If you went to the beach just to look at the sunset, they would arrest you in your car. They're doing that stuff. But if you look around, you walk into the grocery store, you get these people with their homemade masks with gaps big enough for a hummingbird to fly right through. And you're going to ask me to pretend that this is going to prevent a virus from getting through. I go, I'm not playing your game. I'm just not going to do it.
I love the people that were showing up at airports, like with the mattress bags on, and they had holes they punched through, like the bedding bags.
So throughout the entire thing, obviously I live in Florida. It was not as bad as everywhere else, but at the beginning it was not good. But I was under treatment at the VA, and you had to go to appointments, and I would not wear a mask. And so I'm like, what am I going to do? So my daughters and I went to one of the local stores here, and they had these leopard printed masks that when you held them up looked like women's underwear. They were like literally see-through, but because they were like mesh, but because they had the leopard print on them, when you put them on your face, you couldn't tell that they were sheer, like netting. And so I told my husband, I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to buy this. And I'm going to wear this to the VA. It's a mask. It's literally, if you held it up, you could fly a hummingbird through the holes in it. And I wore that the entire time they mandated the mask. which literally did absolutely nothing.
No,
Oh.
it's all, yeah.
Yeah, when we all saw these things, I mean, we knew how ridiculous it was. There was no science involved. It didn't take too much of Googling skills to be able to look up. By the way, I never use Google, but I use the term too much search engine skills to realize that the entire protocol for dealing with pandemics that we had established all the way through 2019, they decided to completely reverse them overnight for political purposes. It was very easy to see. And because of the research I had been doing for 25 plus years, and I realized, I'd read about Cladex and the Rockefellers and the whole Malthusian philosophical depopulation program and the whole Hegelian dialectic. I said, well, this looks really familiar. I mean, it just fit all, they just checked all the boxes. It's the same playbook. It's the same thing they've done with the climate alarmism. I mean, they do the exact same thing. And then you saw every single public health official in the Western world all bought into lockstep this technocratic lie. And you wonder why. You got to ask these questions. And I'm driving everyone around me nuts. So, because I'm calling this stuff out with a very small audience of basically my text threads. And that's kind of how I got into podcasting, because I had a lot to say. But it was really obvious. It was clear. Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah. It's unreal how the last 5 years have changed so many of our lives, right? It's crazy. All right, so let's jump into some Gladio stuff. I mean, especially what you guys have been researching a lot. I mean, since I've seen you last, Colonel, what do you guys want to lay out there? I mean, there's a bunch of things that I could throw out there in my head to ask you, but I want people are here to listen to you guys, not me. So if you got topics of things that you need to get out there, let's get them out there.
Well, I think originally, since you'll have new audience since the last time we talked, we'll talk a little bit about what it is, just very briefly. That we kind of mentioned a few of the terms, but the stay behind unit concept is an old concept as far as a tactic goes, but it was really used by Hitler and his intelligence staff during World War II. In a completely new methodical way. They were called werewolf units. And that was because they were killers at night and citizens, like normal citizens, by day. And what they had basically created a concept that said, we're going to store away caches of equipment so that when we need someone, they can fall in on these pre-positioned equipments and do whatever mission we want them to do. And so there's some common training. Otto Skorzeny, the SS lieutenant colonel that worked for SS General Reinhard Gehlen, was the trainer for him. And so as the Nazi forces moved east into the Soviet Union, it was Otto Skorzeny's job and Reinhard Gehlen to train the people that they were going to litter behind the front lines in creating these stay behind units. And I'm going to tie this into the JFK release because this is very, very important. And so as they established these stay behind, the whole concept was if Russia ever pushes back and they were losing ground, that these forces could pop up behind the front lines of the Soviet Union and attack them from the rear. So tactically, it's a great concept. Unfortunately for them, it didn't work because they were, once the Soviet Union started pushing them back, it was so fast and so brutal that these stay behind units were not able to keep up. So they actually left all of the caches of weapons because they were hidden. And in the years after that, in places like Ukraine, they used that with entities that we now call the Azov Battalion and Right Sector through Bandera and Stetsko and Ledbed and all of the Nazis that they had trained, because Ukraine thought, and was actually promised, they didn't really mean it, by Hitler, that if they helped them against the Soviet Union, that they would create their own country. And one of these guys was going to be the first president of it. He didn't actually mean that. He was just doing that to get them on his side. So to impress Hitler, they started mass murdering people. Um, these are
the Polish remember that very well.
Yeah, these are trained Nazi people to mass murder in the name of, to make a name for themselves to be the first president. They were like auditioning by how many people they could kill. That's
They're also
literally
murdering Jewish people.
primarily, but not just Jewish people.
Right, right.
It was anybody. And so that whole concept was littered through all of the German occupied. It was in France, it was in Belgium, it was everywhere. So as the war comes to an end, Reinhard Gehlen calls, basically communicates, not calls, with Alan Dulles, and they arrange a deal that they're going to expose who all of these stay behind units are. And Alan Dulles says, I'm going to continue this and expand it. And so that's kind of the deal to get Reinhard Gehlen through the Nuremberg trials with Otto Skorzeny to be on the other side of this and then actually be able to create this under the guise of NATO. And that's basically what gave birth to the stay behind units, which eventually generically became called Gladio because of the program in Italy, because Italy is the only one that ever did a real investigation into this whole structure and began exposing the fact that NATO had done this. And
so Colonel, let me jump in there real quick, because that's sets up for where my research comes from and where they intersect. So Daniel, if I may, so I'm always about following the money, and if you look at the tactics that the Colonel is describing, they didn't invent them in World War II. It goes back centuries. We saw this with the British East India Company. They had their own private intelligence, their own private armies. You fast forward to the United States in the late 1900s, and we used law firms to do the same kind of espionage that we're talking about. Sullivan and Cromwell is the law firm that set us up for the invasion of Hawaii and the Spanish-American War in 1898. This was privatized intelligence. It transitioned in World War II to become a government-run operation, but the tactics are the same. Where it got really interesting to me was who financed the Nazis. Who was at the Treaty of Versailles that carved up Europe and the Middle East in such a way that was absolutely set up for failure, unnatural borders, etc. These are people at the Treaty of Versailles, and of course, sitting there are the Dulles brothers, and who are members of Sullivan and Cromwell law firm. Who finances the Nazis in the 1930s? You've got the Brown brothers Harriman, Skull and Bones Harrimans. You've got Prescott Bush, Skull and Bones. You've got a number of the Ford Foundation, Henry Ford financing the Nazis. These are the same people that found the OSS and the CIA, and they're working with exactly what the Colonel's talking about rescuing their Nazi partners in crime. So,
and the Rockefellers.
Anybody who's ever watched me knows that all roads lead to the Rockefellers. I was going to get there. It always goes back to the Rockefellers for me. They just intersect everything. But going back to the Colonel was saying, why did they want to get their Nazi partners out of off scot-free from the Nuremberg trials? Well, because they've been in bed with them, they've been financing them, and the Nazis maybe didn't lose World War II. Maybe the real fascists won.
So the hypothesis that I got right off the bat was that the Nazis did not, and by Nazis, it's really the fascist, which is a better term for it. The fascists that basically want to set up one world government did not lose World War II. They took an overt war into a covert war. And
Correct.
So they took all of the forces that had been arrayed on the battlefield and basically overnight said, we are taking this group, we are going to ratline them into South America, we're going to put them in Africa, they put them in Egypt, they put some in Japan, they put some in the like Vietnam, Korea area. You will find Nazi scientists and other people from the Nazi regime dispersed everywhere. And so basically they just overnight took an overt war of the tanks and guns and turned it into a covert war, all to achieve the same thing. And as Brady pointed out, the unnatural borders that were created after World War II began what was labeled the strategy of tension. And so if I can create lines of tension with artificial borders and fake countries that I'm going to set up after World War II that never existed before, and I can use them as a hotbed of trouble in particularly strategic areas around the world, and at the instant I can get a war, because all I have to do is do a false flag and attack on them, or have them attack someone else, and I've got immediate instability, so I can have perpetual warfare. The real unique thing for me when I first started looking at this, having been in the military and visited all of these places, was, well, hold on a second. It seems like this perpetual war is always around opium fields. What? Are you saying that basically the military is, well, why was opium so important? Well, because opium provided covert funding. If you're going to have a covert war, you have to be able to fund it covertly. And so they create weapons trafficking, human trafficking, and drug trafficking in order to generate covert funding for their covert operations. And so that kind of is the entire primer on what we're looking at. And then you can go and just dissect it into different areas and look at examples. But what I wanted to do is tie this to the JFK piece, because
real quick, before you go there.
Hold on. Let me finish the part. Because I had made some assumptions. My first thing was, when I was looking at NATO, and that's all you ever hear, is it was in Europe. It was in Europe, Operation Gladio. But we're part of NATO. How are we not part of Operation Gladio? Who are our Operation Gladio? Well, it became really apparent to me that the Cuban exiles were our Gladio units. They were trained by the CIA. They were deployed all over the world, just like the rest of the Gladio assassins. And so I have just assumed this entire time that I didn't have a smoking gun. I found in the JFK files the fact that they actually used the term stay behind units as they were setting them up in Cuba with the Cuban exiles. So unequivocally in the JFK files, it says without a single doubt anymore that there is proof that the Cuban exiles were our trained Gladio operators, and they were using them to put them in stay behind units.
Wow. Interesting.
So
Go ahead.
Just to hammer her point home of, Operation Golden Lily, which we'll talk about more, is basically a huge stash of Asian gold that the CIA appropriated for their covert operations, right after World War II in the Philippines. But they continued to fund themselves because you don't need oversight. Congressional oversight doesn't matter if you're a self-funding intelligence operation. If you've got to go to Congress and ask for money, you probably have to explain yourself. But if they can self-fund through opium smuggling, you don't really have to answer to Congress. And that's really what happened. But to hammer the point home is, if you look at the 1970s, when the United States was out of Vietnam, we kind of had lost our control of the opium trade in the 1970s. And what happens next is we get the cocaine smuggling into America immediately thereafter. And you don't really have to be a rocket scientologist to guess that the CIA was behind that as well. And it turns out that they were. And, once again, it's another Gladio operation with Operation Condor coming out of Mexico City, which once again ties back to JFK. A lot of the JFK plotting came out of the Mexico City CIA station. And, there's a one name that I've been saying this for years, that if you want to know who is really behind the, if you want to find out if they're really going to reveal all the JFK files, you look for a name of Ann Goodpasture, spelled exactly like it sounds, because she was the top aide to Mexico City Station Chief Win Scott, And she's the one who transcribed Lee Harvey Oswald phone calls to Cuba and the KGB prior to the assassination. So if her testimony is not made available, and she had originally denied this and then admitted it, that she was that person. But if that information is not out, then we don't have it all. So Ann Goodpaster, to me, is the litmus test.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if that pops up here in the next couple of weeks. Real quick, before we move on past the Ukraine-Russia thing, and Colonel, we've talked about this a little bit because this is one of the pieces to this thing that has intrigued me the most. And I can tell that a lot of you guys as followers are here because they're the ones commenting in the comments.
Yeah.
So I appreciate everybody here. Make sure you like the video, share the video. Let's continue to come over onto the show all the time. But for the people that did come over here and haven't watched the show before, the interesting piece of this for me is because I'm Ukrainian, I'm Jewish. So I've been trying to wake up so many people about Ukraine. Ukraine is one of these nations that was never intended to be a nation. We're really Russian. If you're Ukrainian and you're listening, you're Russian. You're not Ukrainian. That's a lie. It's always been a lie. Even if you just watch Oliver Stone's 2 documentaries, you will come away with so much wisdom about the creation of Ukraine and what's been going on over there. And they're using the same tactics with Zelensky and the Nazi fascists murdering their own people, making you believe that it is Russia's the big bad Satan, because that's the same lie they've been feeding us for decades and decades and decades, right? And so this is the most intriguing piece to a lot of the current events for me on this, is because people don't understand what the hell is going on. And I think that, now you guys tell me, I think this whole mineral deal that Trump is trying to do with like gaining 50% of the profits of their minerals ties back to this somehow. And I don't know what it is yet. Maybe you guys do.
So can I address, I don't know who Earth Mama is, but this is a comment that gets oftentimes interjected into this, and you led right into it. The Nazis financed by Zionists. That absolutely is not true. That is something that people like to spread around. It is not true. The Zionist movement was created out of the same people that created the members of the Fabian Society in the late 1800s. That was all born out of the UK and this British Round Table, the Fabian Society, the Cecil Rhodes, the Oswald Mosley. Those are all of the people that came up with this concept of the World Zionist Congress, and they created this entire infrastructure around. And I wrote a whole paper and did a research project on that. And there are a lot of misunderstandings about the origins of that. And the reason why that is so important is because those people that were involved in the creation of all of these different strategy of tension, because that's what the entire purpose was, are the same people. When British was basically occupying Egypt, they funded and created the Muslim Brotherhood. Most people don't know that. That was City of London money. That's exactly what Brady was pointing out. Follow the money. When you create what becomes terrorist organizations to control entire regions, which was the entire purpose of the Muslim Brotherhood, so that you could create a yin and a yang in order to implement a strategy of tension. As he pointed out, if you don't have a left and a right, you don't have tension. There's always going to be two things. There's going to be D's and there's going to be R's. There's going to be lefts and there's going to be rights. There's going to be a good guy and a bad guy. And whoever your government tells you is the good guy, you unequivocally know is the bad guy.
Yeah. And Brady, before you chime in, I just want to emphasize one other point, and I do this all the time, is I want people to understand that there's a huge distinction between Israel's deep state, like every country on this planet has a deep state, and the people that are Jewish people that walk in covenant with God, who are the people of the Bible. And my wife puts it a very good way. And if you are familiar with the Bible, then you should know the story where there's a family that is attached to a gentleman called Korach, right? Korach basically takes his family and corrupts his family and a bunch of followers to go against Moses and try to take over leadership of the nation of Israel while they're in the wilderness. Well, God didn't appoint this guy. God appointed Moses. So what happens to Korach, who turns out to be a traitor, is him, his people, and his followers all got swallowed up by the earth. what I'm trying to get at with that point is that those people that choose to not walk in covenant with the Creator, that do not walk in covenant with God, I'm not talking about the laws of man or any kind of additional things, but those people who walk in covenant with God, those are the Jewish people. These other people that are Israelis or of Israeli descent, like the George Soros, those people totally disqualify themselves as being technically a Jew. You have to understand that there's various sects of Jewish people in the state of Israel, right? So there's Israelis that are non-religious, and then you have the Jewish people who are considered the religious. All of these people are distinct from these groups that we're talking about that were part of the strategy of tension. And I just want to make sure that people understand that.
And what's important about that is just like what Brady was saying with the Rockefellers. The Rockefellers were not Jewish. I'm sorry. And they were funding the Nazis. They also funded the Bolsheviks. There were City of London people that have nothing to do with the Jewish religion or lineage or Khazarians or whatever that funded the communists, which they labeled as far left, and the Nazis, which they labeled as far right. That was a psychological operation in order to be able to create the strategy of tension so that if you go too far this way as a person, you're too far right. If you go too far this way, you're too far left, and I'm going to call you a communist. The labeling is part of the psychological operation to marginalize you and make you shut up.
Yeah, so this goes back to follow the money and how the world really works. And, people are all, it's very easy to say, okay, I found some truth that, gosh darn it, Jews have a disproportionate amount of influence in our government. And the answer, that is absolutely true from a population basis. They do. AIPAC influences a lot of our politicians. Israel is a favored nation for reasons that are not necessarily in America's best interest. So I'm going to jump to the conclusion that Jews run the world, but that's not reality. If you dig deeper and understand how the world really works, which the guy who put it best was a guy by the name of Michael Weisskopf, and he wrote a book called Superclass. And I don't agree with Weisskopf's politics at all. He spent most of 30 years working for Kissinger and Brzezinski, both of whom are Rockefeller puppets, for the record. Again, all roads lead to Rockefeller. But Weisskopf's been in the room where these global decisions have been made. And what he describes the superclass is around the world, there's about 6,000 super connected families. It's a global Game of Thrones. And they're all playing a game where they're all above the law. They protect each other. They sit on each other's boards. They send their minions to the United Nations. They're the ones who carve up the world and try to carve out this globalist new world order. That's who runs the world. And some of them are Jewish. Some of them are Protestant. Some of the Puritans are all over America's deep state. And that's what Skull and Bones is all about, is this whole Puritan superclass on the Eastern establishment. But you also have the British version of it, the Round Table. You've got, the Dutch, where they're, absolutely are involved in this with Royal Dutch Shell. The Chinese have their own version of a superclass. All around the world, you've got these people that put themselves above society, and they operate on a diplomatic and a financial level where they just play the game differently, and they might want the rest of us to follow the rules. That's how the world really works. So to blame the Jews or the Muslims or whatever it's simplistic, and the world's more complex and nuanced than that.
No, I totally agree with that 100%. Man, it's going too fast, guys. We only got 6 minutes left. We got to schedule another one.
We will do that.
Is there anything about the Ukraine piece that you guys want to touch on right before we have to cut this loose? I mean, how do you see this thing ending? I mean, it needs to happen yesterday, but we got to find ways that hopefully that President Trump and this administration expose this for what it really is, and we could start to see this stuff. I mean, we're probably never going to see it come to an end in our lifetimes, right?
Oh, I believe we will.
No.
Yeah, we're living through Gutenberg 2.0. And I say that because Gutenberg was the printing press that changed the Western world. All of a sudden, people from one hamlet could speak to people from another hamlet. We had the printing of Bibles, and then we had the printing of newspapers. And all of a sudden, we had the Enlightenment and this free exchange of ideas. exploded across Europe, and the result of that was this concept of self-determination that ended up in 1776, which would have been a public revolution all over the world, because these were good ideas. They made sense that we could actually rule ourselves. Now, the plutocrats, or the bad guys, the deep state, whatever you want to call them back then, have always been fighting back against that. They had to seize the means of communication through the 19th century. They started buying up newspapers. You get to the 20th century and the means of communication. Well, it was J.P. Morgan bought up dozens of newspapers on the Eastern Seaboard to try to push for World War I. There's propaganda. It's a means of communication. How do we talk to each other? Then we get the radio in the 20th century and the television. That's how most people are disseminating their news. Well, guess what? Those were natural-born monopolies. And the 20th century is the bloodiest century in human history. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we get the internet. And it was originally used as a tool to work against us, but it's the genie that got out of the bottle. So now there's people like us that can talk and have the free flow of ideas. And you see it in the polls, how many people believe in the BS anymore. So we are living through Gutenberg 2.0. And to me, it's this free exchange of ideas. And these kinds of conversations, that's the path to freedom from maybe forever, from this terrible plague that's set, basically had their foot on the neck of humanity for centuries.
One of the things I've learned in the last 2 years, you guys, is talking with people around the country that are doing what we're doing. I've met a gentleman that was in the news industry for decades, knew what was going on and got out of it because he knew what was going on, and he's trying to do his own thing and trying to expand people's understanding of what really true news is, right? And one thing that he told me in the first conversation that I had with him is he asked me if I knew what the demographic was that was still watching the Fox News, the CNNs, the MSNBCs, like what age, demographic. And I had to stop and think about it for a second, because I know it's not mine. I'm in my late 40s, getting into 50s in a few years. It ain't me. I'm not watching that garbage. I know most of the people I know are not watching that garbage. So when I said no, I don't know, because I need you to tell me who it is, because I don't think it's my age group and younger for sure. I know it's not the people younger than me. And he proceeded to tell me that it's people that are 65 and older who are the demographic watching all of those, which means we don't live to be, most people don't live to be 100 plus years old, like the government wants you to think, that they're still out there registered to vote and collecting Social Security. People are dying. People were dying in like mid 70s, 80s, right? So that means that we have less than 15 years before these people go bankrupt, right? That puts me, if it puts me 15 years from now, I'm going to be, 62. I'll still be doing this. At least I hope I would still be doing this. And I would hope that a lot more people are awake to the things that we are talking about, right? Because the whole phrase is, over the last 4 years, we are the news, right? I don't want to be news. I want to be teaching people. I want to be educating people about the history we've been lied to about for decades, right? And the things that are happening in our own lives that they need to be aware of, and how they can fix them, not just sit back and be spoon-fed garbage, right? So that's my last 2 minutes of spiel. So if you guys want to close.
So I think the key to what you just said is, how do we who have the knowledge reach the 30-something-year-olds and the 20-something-year-olds? Because I have this struggle right now. My daughter just had my first grandbaby, and she wants to take parenting advice off of TikTok. And, you want to go, it always involves mom being right. But it'll take a day or two. And so somehow there has to be a connection of us to them to do this mind meld thing, because people like us do the research and we have the information to pass on to them, but there needs to be a venue that's entertaining enough. And it can't be Game of Thrones. That allows us to pass that information on. And that, I think, is the critical challenge that we're faced with.
Yeah. Brady, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, first of all, it's an absolute pleasure being on your show, Daniel. Thanks for having us.
Oh, thank you.
And I think this is just so important. There's just so much information out there. None of us have a monopoly on all of it. So the more times we exchange ideas and get, people out there thinking for themselves and just asking these tough questions, I think that's humanity's salvation. And it's an honor and a pleasure to come on and with a couple people I like and respect, and more than happy to do this anytime you want.
Awesome. Well, we definitely are going to be doing it again with the both of you for sure. I mean, I think this is the show I've had the most comments on. We're at 60. So you guys need to come back every week. I know these are your two favorite people and all, but there's other good things that happen on the show. So
these guys are with me every day at 4 o'clock. They're totally amazing, brilliant. And I have to credit them, all of them. I see them, Bridget, Cousin It, McGirr Sarge, SR71. All of those guys are the reason that I have half of the information that I have, because it's their sources that they provide, books that they read. They watch videos on my behalf looking for information. And so I am grateful for every single one of them.
Well, I am too. I mean, because if it wasn't for them helping you and you helping me and Brady, now you as well, I mean, I wouldn't have the knowledge that I have, and I'm still learning. I still want to grow. So if anybody wants to start blowing up my inbox with articles, links, I'm open. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, again, thank you for taking the time out today. It was a really good show. Went by fast, and I just don't think we can get enough of this topic. I mean, maybe we need to start pumping out documentaries. I think this is one of the avenues to go, especially with I mean, if you guys are in agreement, let's talk more about it, because I think this is definitely a means to do things now. It's really popular right now, if you know how to do it.
That's on the agenda, Daniel. We will talk offline.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, appreciate it. Willie, we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
Cheers, everyone. Cheers.
See ya. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. It's always a blast when Colonel's on, and now having Brady on as well. I'm really looking forward to growing friendship with him, and appreciate all of you guys being here. Do me a favor and share the video, like the video, follow the channel, and keep coming back every week. We talk about good things, and we focus a lot on some deeper, dark things at times, especially with human trafficking and the border invasion, things that are going on, but they are necessary topics as well. So thanks for being here, and we will see you guys again next Thursday.